choose to love with freedom to fly from my heart where the light keeps shining, and I choose to feel the whole world crying for the strength that we can rise above. I choose love.
Well, hello everyone. Hi, Ina.
Hello there. Happy to
Hey.
meet
Hi,
you.
Andreas.
Hey, Larry. How's it going?
Wonderful.
And hello, all the people that are watching. My name is Andreas Julik, and I am on the support team for Grace Healing Ministries. And what we are doing is we are going to have a conversation every week about a topic for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And today I picked a topic on provision. I think it has to do a lot with the fact that we are all looking for provision. And there's really three aspects that I see in provision, actually four. One is God's provision. I'm going to ask you some questions about that, Larry and Ina. The other one is just material livelihood that we are after. Our health is part of provision so that we can live life. And our happiness or mental well-being. All of those things are challenged, specifically now. Now is May, or it's April 2020. And people are thinking about it and making changes in their life. And they're actually stressed about it too. I want to maybe start with you, Larry. You know, the term provision from a spiritual perspective has probably more connotations than what I just mentioned, you know, the material health and happiness. Can you just kind of frame it for us, and so we can?
Well, the care to be taken with that is it has been framed by society in many ways that aren't accurate in aligning with God. There's a prosperity teaching out there that's teaching people that prosperity proves a person's standing before God, and that is not true, quite frankly. The reality is any provision, any blessing we receive that could be directly identified as God's hand is merely evidence of grace. It doesn't say that because I've generated this wealth, I am of good standing. It only says that God is blessing me with that blessing or that wealth or that provision. It does not define me. And what happens is many people turn around and they start looking at, I'm a self-made man or I'm a self-made woman, and they're missing the point that there is not a self-made anything. One of the main reasons why Grace Healing is called Grace Healing is because we're here to provide the understanding of what true grace really is. Every aspect of blessing, every aspect of provision that we encounter, as you defined it, whether it's God's provision, material provision, provision of health, provision of happiness and well-being, those are all provided by grace. The nature of how we alter them is determined by how we are veiled spiritually. So again, if you're asking what is God's provision as opposed to one or the other, God's provision is present within every one of those four you named. God's provision is the core to each and every one of those. And again, the nature of how we function within those four, whether truly godly attributes or lesser attributes, will determine the measurable result within any of those four attributes that you named.
So you mentioned measurable. And what comes to mind to me, Ina, I'm going to ask you, is when I hear the word measuring things, it is tied to conditions, isn't it? That's my first reaction, you know, that I think I want to measure love, I want to measure my prosperity, I want to measure my health. There's always a standard that is there, right, to measure against, so that you can actually have some kind of a scale. So, Ina, how do you see, you know, the topic of conditions that we put on ourselves that may limit us in what we, in the prosperity or the provisions that we are seeking? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, it's exactly what Larry's saying, and I can break it down a little bit more and what I've understood through the many years of being involved in ministry and being involved with different churches, and also knowing the scriptures. I'm not a theologian, but I have looked at all those, and those always came across my path. And the question that I always had, and many have today, is measuring, okay, if you have this much money, then you're in right alignment with God. Then there comes the question of those that don't really have the relationship with God and they're successful. How do you answer for those kind of things? And you have those that are very happy, they don't have much. And you have those that have a lot and they're not happy. So when you ask me about the measuring of prosperity or even a balance in that, I'm going to go back to the simplicity of how I personally live, and that's that personal relationship with God, regardless of how you entered upon this earth, whether you're one that has been given riches and you've been graced. That right there, that word graced, is huge to me, that I had to understand that concept. Because God is no respecter of person. He loves us all the same. And it doesn't matter whether we're rich or poor or what. It's how we've come into this earth, how we've decided to walk it, what balance, where are our priorities. When we set our priorities in place where God is, that all will come into balance. I really believe that. So we as a people that have been involved in churches or been brought up a certain way, we have been told that you're measuring that by what you see that poor man over there, but he has a great relationship with God. It's not about what is he doing wrong. God is punishing him.
And I want to, if I can I step in for just a moment, Ina?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to help people understand that this isn't a measuring stick like, oh, because I'm a millionaire, God is blessing me.
Right.
It's a way to measure the nature of how God has positioned you. So even if a person is walking in the human definition, like Andreas was saying, in the condition of being poor, people have to recognize that they may be the wealthiest individual upon the earth in their grace before God, because they may be in an absolute state of blessing, absolute state of purity, an absolute state of grace, walking out their spiritual journey, helping to facilitate healing upon the earth and transformation throughout the spiritual realm, but they don't show any physical wealth. So how is their life viewed by us when we've been conditioned to think of wealth as somehow a measuring stick, or joyfulness within a person is a measuring stick? There are people that have never seen, felt, or known the presence of God within their life, yet they walk with a level of faith that can't be matched by others. They show up every day in that state of awareness. They've never sensed anything that taught them that God was present in their lives, yet they have absolute knowing within them. So they have been graced a different measure, so that even if they're walking through a place of lesser abundance or a place of judgment by the conditions of humanity, they are still blessed in knowing God's presence. So that's God's provision in the form of grace to know greater faith than those who might have great wealth.
You just
So when you're, go for it.
I just meant to ask, you mentioned people that have never felt the presence of God,
Yes.
that are living a good life, they're happy, they have prosperity, and they're happy and content. So it's possible to live without that presence of God, right? That awareness of God. Is it, or is it not?
I would say that there are, let me give you an example. I met this one woman. She was an elder woman, and every single day this woman would go to the church, sit quietly in a back corner, and she would do one thing: pray all day for those who surrounded her. She in her life was conditioned in this way that she became a prayer instrument. Now, she didn't have great wealth. She didn't have great success within her family because the family was detached and broken from her. But she still went with she had a knowing within her that God was present, even though it had never been proved to her throughout her life. But the gift of God's provision through grace of faith rested in her. And she went there every single day, knowing that her prayer was known by God and God would utilize it for his own use. That to me shook me to my core to go, whoa, this woman has little or nothing on a worldly theater, yet she is an absolute trust in God above how the world conditions or measures things.
But so she had a sense of presence of
Yes.
God. But how about people that don't? They can still be.
Remember, her sense of presence was a gift of grace. Yet she didn't have any physical manifestation in her life that could say, there was a miracle of God. Oh, there's my brother being healed over there. Oh, here's my person who raised. She couldn't say in any way in her conversation of anything that she ever encountered in her life that said, there's God. It was all just this knowing of God's presence. I mean, it was truly humbling to me because here I've walked this ground since I was 9 years old, aware of the miraculous and seeing the nature of God's presence. And I'm like looking at this woman, elder woman, going, wow, she's walked a whole life with none of those reminders of God, yet she is still in absolute trust that God knows her. That to me was astounding. So that's God's provision extending beyond the physical manifestation of money or provision of food. And I do know you want to move to that understanding of how does it go to the material side. So I'll yield back over to Ina Marie or to yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You just said what I wanted to say. So you're reading my mind.
Here we go. Going forward. Don't have to say anything, Andreas.
Go ahead, Ina.
Oh, but no, the provision is definitely a balance of more than the money. Of course, we talk about that in our health and our well-being spiritually, physically, emotionally, our balance in God. And there are many people that they're walking this earth. Once again, that grace, that word grace comes into play. And again, when you bring up things in which how I was brought up in the church, there are, without really realizing it, there are judgments on that. Like, they start analyzing. We analyze why this person's this, why they're not. There's not money there. They've got health issues. Why is there health issues? And of course, with Grace Healing, we can answer all those kind of questions merely because of God's grace and revelation being manifested upon the earth, because we choose to seek God first, regardless of whatever the topic may be. Just like this is about provision, the provision to have clothing, the provision to have a roof over our house, the provision of the fullness of God's presence. It just is an array of balance. And so my prayer has always been, personally, is the balance of God fully, and have an awareness of it to release things that have been in my life or generations, to set captives free, or the provision to come into play, and not take it on as something as myself. We do that as human beings, whether we're involved in ministry or in a church. We do put it on ourselves, that we actually are putting self in there instead of releasing it to God and allowing him to enter into that place of those kind of questions. And hopefully what we're doing here is opening up those airways and in the heart of people to set them free of the, maybe some bondages that they've had through the years, being told of judgment of not having the money. Well, why is your health this? All these kind of things. That's in the realm of provision.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you mentioned the basically the slogan or the motto of what we use at Grace Healing, that is seek God first, really is what we should do first of all before we entertain any thought or any action. How, for people that may not be familiar with or not have a relationship with God or with a prayer life, how do you guys describe or teach or tell somebody how to seek God first? How do you do that?
In that respect, when you're like, we're still on the material side, and I want to take what Ina Marie was just saying, and your question here, if a person doesn't have that prayer life, how do they connect with it? It is as simple as the fact that, like, if Ina Marie said that somebody isn't showing those blessings and they don't understand the importance of releasing the captives, as we name them, those are spiritual influences in your life. It is honestly about measuring yourself, not society. You measure yourself in the nature of your responses to what's going on in society or the nature of what's evidencing in your life. So if you are showing lack, the spiritual lack, and that can be disguised in many ways. Like, for instance, a person that is dealing with hoarding. You walk into their house and their house is just overflowing with stuff. And people are like, wow, look at all that stuff they got. That's the spirit of lack manifesting in inappropriate, unbalanced purchasing. And then they can't let go of things because they're fearful if they let go of it, they may have needed it at some point. So they've lost the importance of seeking God, and they're allowing for it to shift to the material governing them, governing the nature of their walk, governing the nature of their lives. And so if a person is in a place where they are looking at their lives and they're saying, materially, my life is out of balance, there's something off, something's not coming into alignment. So we release, like Ina stated, we release the spiritual lack that could produce that. We release the fear of provision that could provide that. Release financial anxieties that could provide that kind of result in our life, because our lives are producing a manifested result that does not align with the nature of God. So now what's happened is now we've released the spiritual components that have brought us to this point in our lives. We just choose to release those things of a spiritual nature. We choose to embrace the God presence, meaning we choose to embrace God first. Now, if I've never had a prayer life, God knows that. So reaching to God through Yahweh, the name, the divine vibration that is Yah, reaching into it is a beginning. Breathing, recognizing the breath of God's presence within you, and then any attribute or nature within yourself that rises, that does not fit with perfection. God is perfection. Therefore, God's attributes all come from a place of perfection. And if you're evidencing something in your provision that is not aligning with perfection, then you release it. Now we go forward. We've released it. It's no longer a part of us spiritually. It's not governing the measurable result of our day. Then we move in the attributes of God for a season of time until we see the measurable result of change. There is a patience that's required in the spiritual process. There's a peace that you can embrace by seeking God first. As you begin to see the measure of the spiritual releases and God's presence show up in your life, and all of a sudden material provision starts to come in new ways. It starts to come in new ways. It sets off the past destruction that you may have walked, and you start to see blessing. But I will also say you have to take great care that as it begins to change, don't be caught in the trap to think that somehow that determines your righteousness before God. Because you're just moving yourself into a place of grace and alignment before God. So yes, blessing is going to come in. But if you don't see blessing manifesting, that's okay too, because now you're positioned by God first, and you can look upon it and continue to release the spiritual things that may be producing what you define by your measuring stick a lesser result, because you are still being trusted with giving freedom to the spiritual process, doing the work that Yeshua told us to do. What he said, set the captives free, and you will be doing greater things than I, as the Spirit of God dwells within you. So if we really understand this, when it comes to these things falling short, any material provision of any kind, something not coming into alignment, we have to look within ourselves to say, what is it stirring in me? And I release the lack, I release the fear, I release these things, and then I know myself freed for them. But if they continue to rise, we continue to release them for the sake of all humanity. We continue to release them for those closest to us. We don't stop saying, oh, I must be a monster because provision has not come into our lives. No, we embrace the truth that God is present with us, and we are being trusted in a holy opportunity to bring healing to situations that we face in life.
Thank you, Larry. And what I'm thinking is all these principles apply to everything. It's not just material provision, health, happiness.
Exactly.
It's all the same thing. And, you know, one thing I get out of this discussion too is, instead of looking out all the time, you know, to find a God to measure us, look inside, right, through the breath and meditate. Aina, how do you do that? How do you, do you have like a daily practice that helps you keep that balance, that meditation?
Well, I could say this, I have to say, and I have found through my years, is that here we are again with that word, we're graced. And it's just from the beginning, as long as I can remember, I always sought God in all that I did. Now, I didn't know what I know now because it was coming into remembrance. But my life and the choices I've made is I live and breathe Him first and foremost, the seeking God first, developing that relationship, allowing Him to love me, allowing Him to love you. So then when you can do that, that's when the captives can be set free, because you're allowing God in a place where you're setting things free, and He fills those voids that you've had in your life. But for me, it's just being still before God and just developing a relationship just like you would with a friend or even your own family members. And that's the best place to be, and allow God to love you. That's where I find it.
I completely agree.
Yes.
Great. I agree too, and I still have a lot of practicing to do. No,
all of us do.
All of us do. It's a good thing. It's a good practice.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, we're coming almost to the end of the time, so I just wanted to kind of summarize a little bit from what I got out of this conversation. Just 3 points. You know, seek God first in whatever we do. You know, that's something I personally really want to focus on more often, and that will help to build that relationship with God as well. Then grace was a key word in our discussion, allowing God to love me, to love us, right? And I think we often create that barrier so that we don't let that love flow. So if we accept that grace, it will help us, and it will help us setting things free that hinder us to many provisional things, provision, be it material, health, or mental. So before I let you guys have a final word, I just want to mention to our listeners where you can get more resources on Grace Healing. First of all, we have a website, gracehealing.org, where we have several sections in there where you can put prayer requests in. You have the phone numbers where you can reach Larry or Aina anytime to help you and pray with you. We also have started a meditation call every Wednesday night, which we do on Zoom like we do now. That's Wednesday night at 8 p.m. On the website, there's a link where you can register, and you get the link where how you can log in on Wednesday evening, and we'll send an email out as well to those that have registered every Wednesday. And finally, gracehealing.video. So gracehealing.video brings you directly to our YouTube channel. We have I think it's now over 170 videos on there on any conceivable topic. So please visit and like, and also comment on our Facebook page and the YouTube channel.
Awesome.
So Larry and Aina, do we want to have some final words before we wrap it up?
I would like to kind of like go back real quickly to your opening comments about provision, being God's provision, material provision, health provision, happiness, and well-being. And then to your comment about, wait a minute, stop looking outside, look within, look to the internal aspect of what's governing us. And I want to take this word in, personal accountability. Personal accountability is the fact that God has promised us 120 years with a sound mind and a healthy body. We are witnessing a generation that doesn't even think like that. They have this conceived notion that my dad died when he was 78, I'll probably die around 82. You know, I mean, they're already formulating this mindset. That is where you have shed your personal accountability and separated yourself from how you're supposed to walk the spiritual ground. And the reality is, if you're going to embrace God's provision, material provision, health and wellness through provision, happiness and well-being, you're personally accountable to the fact that even if my life is defined by humanity as miserable, how am I doing the spiritual releases so I can recognize that, oh my God, even with all this nasty stuff that's happening, I can look at this and go, wow, I can see God's blessing happening for the spiritual transformation that's going on in the midst of it. So if I'm financially challenged, I can look at it and say, okay, God, what am I doing to make spiritual transformation occur within myself? And how are you going to use me to make this change throughout humanity? My material provision, same thing. Health and wellness, something's off. My lungs are disrupted. I'm not functioning well. I have a friend that's been sucked into the COVID virus, yet they got taken into near death. Well, did I pray to release them from the spirit of grief, deep sorrow, those things that govern the nature of the lungs? So what is our accountability within this in the prayer process? So even if we're in the midst of the fire, what is our role to squelch the burning flames? What is our role on the spiritual level to become God's presence in the midst of that setting, to recognize God above what's evidencing to us upon the earth? That is when we recognize ourselves truly embracing the divine provision, which is God in us. And God in us is the provider in every situation we encounter, whether it's a building burning ablaze or our bank account flipping upside down, whatever. God is present there to console, strengthen, and guide us through wisdom to bring change to it. And that's where I would like to leave it for myself. And for
Any final words from you?
Well, he pretty much said it all. But the bottom line with me is always going to be his love. His love is abound above and beyond of anything we could ever ask or think. He takes all the fears, doubts, concerns, provision. He is the one. You seek him first, and the love that he has for you, more than you could ever know. And that's one of the most important things you need to know for each person that sees this, of the love that he has for each and every one of us. So I'll leave it at that. I just want to share the love of God. In Grace Healing, we do that.
Yeah.
So this has been wonderful, wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you, Ina, and thank you, Larry. What a great conversation.
And thank you, Andreas.
I enjoy doing this every week, and we'll see you next week again.
Wonderful.
Yes, awesome.
All right.
Take care and be blessed.
Take care. Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.